After the workshop, there will be another link for CEU evaluations. Please click on that link for a short evaluation, which also includes the CEU request form. Once you have completed the evaluation, you'll be taken to a page with a link to your CEU certificate. We'll also post the link for the workshop evaluation in the chat. I also need to let you know that we have some great conference merchandise, so be sure to check out our online store at ctaafsc.com/shop. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming our presenter, Dr. Calvin Kelly. Dr. Kelly recently served as a dean and professor at St. Edward's University in Austin. He has over 25 years of teaching experience in psychology and counseling at the undergraduate and graduate levels, and 29 years of experience in private practice as a licensed mental health professional. As a clinician, students affairs professional, and educator, Dr. Kelly has had the opportunity to practice and refine his leadership skills and styles, which are based on the servant leadership model. He has presented nationally on topics related to his area of expertise and interest in mental health. They include, but are not limited to, trauma and post-traumatic stress-related issues, racial identity development, men and depression, secondary trauma, holistic wellness, organizational development and leadership, and team building. Dr. Kelly feels strongly that it is his belief in family and close spiritual connection to a higher power that keeps him grounded and focused. Now, let's enjoy the presentation. And even though, yes, we're used to coming back together for a Q&A, please, this is meant to be a conversation. This is meant to be an engaging experience that is fully there for both the presenter and you as the attendees. So do not hesitate to interrupt, put a question out there, raise your hand. No matter what, Dr. Kelly is going to just make sure you are integrated into this piece as much as you are able to give and willing to give. So without further ado, let's enjoy the presentation.
What if I told you that I'm sad, that I'm anxious, that my partner lost her job, or that I'm going through a divorce? What if I told you that I worry every day about my child, that my mother is dying? I was just diagnosed with diabetes, cancer, or hypertension. What if I told you that I'm not sleeping well, that I'm addicted to drugs, that I'm stressed out about work, or that I just can't find anywhere where I make a difference? What if I told you that I'm burned out, that I'm in an abusive relationship, or that I am simply angry all the time? Would you help me? Would you help me? Good morning, everyone, and happy Black History Month. Elliot, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Again, like you, Elliot, I also want to thank the Central Texas African American Family Support Conference Leadership and Committee for inviting me and accepting my proposal to present before this group. Man Up is really, again, about addressing the mental health needs of men of faith. But I hope we also have women that are here with us today. And I say that because not only has it been men and women in our community, but since its inception, the Black church has been at the front line for addressing a myriad of social issues that have often plagued the Black community. And so, as Elliot said, I want this to be a conversation, an engaged conversation. So at any point in time that you feel that you have something that you want to contribute, you want to add to what I'm saying, I am merely a voice that is presenting, but I know that we have a number of experts out there who have just as much information, if not more, about this topic. And so our goal here today is to help everyone to leave with an additional tool in their toolbox. So don't hold back, share, and let us all learn together. We are all familiar with this. You know, as I said, the church, the African American church, has been an integral part of my life. I'm a PK. My father was a pastor of 2 churches in Selma, Alabama. And so I really took all of this to heart. And as I was thinking about my presentation, I was reminded that often we as African Americans have always been talking about mental health. I was reminded of a prayer that was taught to me by my great-grandmother, who passed it on to her daughter, who passed it on to my mother, who passed it on to me. And that transforming prayer of every morning that I get up and I pass this on to my children, and I say to myself, thank you, God, for waking me clothed in my right mind. How many of you awaken today and thank God for being clothed in your right mind? For me, that was a reminder that we've been talking about mental health in our community since we knew. And since we used the frame, or the term, I should say, being clothed in our right minds. So let's develop some common language here. I call this man up. First thing I want to ask our listening audience, what is a man? That's not a rhetorical question. I want to get someone to talk to me and tell me what exactly is your definition of a man. We use that term. I'm calling this man up. Someone talk to me. What is a man?
So along lines of that question, Dr. Kelly, we have kind of like the idea of success being associated with being a man. And so this question comes from the audience of, with regard to older African-American men who have been successful through life, but have been taught to not show emotions or weakness, that eventually will affect our relationships. So how do you get them to see that there's nothing wrong with expressing how they feel?
Wow, what a great question. Do we have a name for the person that asked that question, Elliot?
We do not at this moment.
Okay, what a great question. And I want you to hold to that question, because we're going to talk about feelings, emotions, and all of that. That is such a great question, and it's such an important part of my presentation. So hold on to that. And if I don't answer it throughout the presentation, I want to circle back, but I think I have an answer for you. I think I saw where Stacy raised her hand to answer possibly what is a man.
She did. She should just have to unmute and she should be free to speak.
Miss Stacy, if you can unmute yourself, you'll be able to answer or give us some feedback or input. Miss Stacy, are you there? Okay. While she's coming on, let's take a look at what Webster said a man was. Webster Dictionary, an adult human male. Doesn't give us a whole lot of information. Then I turned to the Urban Dictionary. The Urban Dictionary defined a man as having money, being affectionate, kind, a good father, and a person that is faithful. Let me know if these resonate with you, or if there are additional attributes and traits about what a man is. When you think about being a man, Webster is very clear. The Urban Dictionary has given us some definitions or some terms that relate to being a man. Does being a man really mean that you have money? Does it really mean that you're affectionate, you're a kind person, a good father, and someone that's faithful? We're going to talk about what it means to be a man, and we're going to ask our men to man up, because we're talking about mental health and the mental health issues that are impacting the African-American male. But because what we know is that when the male or any member of our community is not doing well, then we're all not doing well. So this goes back to that question that you asked earlier, Elliot, or the person that framed this question. Now, one of the things that we know about boys in our society, for those of us that are men, we realize that we were conditioned very early on. We were conditioned, we were socialized by our family, by external members of our community, by our churches, of what it meant to be a man. And so here's some things that I want to just point out, because boys, as I put up here, are either forced to conform to these ideas or they face the threat of being expelled from our community. And we expel Black boys, Black men from our community in a myriad of ways that I'm going to talk about later. Let me know how this resonates with you all. Real men do not cry openly or express emotions except for anger. Real men do not express weakness or fear. Real men are heterosexual and dominant in and out of the bedroom. Real men are financial providers and not caregivers. Real men do not act like a woman. They're never unemployed. They're always confident. Real men know how to make decisions, and we never ask for help. Real men view women as objects and property. And of course, the mantra is that when real men come together, we talk about sports. We're going to talk about the Super Bowl. And we use this as our mode of interaction. How do you feel about hearing that this is what many men have been conditioned to believe? I'm going to leave this up here for a second because I do want to hear back from our audience, and I would like to get some comments about these are the things that are often associated with the concept of being a real man.
So Dr. Kelly, in response to your question of what a man is, that definition, we have answers that have included protector, provider, reflection of God's glory and divine masculinity, teacher, brother, father, son, hero, husband, love, our healer, and leader.
I love that. I love that because I especially love a reflection of God, because, you know, we are made in God's image and likeness. And for many of us who are spiritually led or walk in faith, we're often taught and believe that a man is supposed to be the head of the house. But we're only supposed to be the head of the house if we are following in the footsteps of God. That's the reason why I call myself a servant leader, because my first premise is to serve. Now, I want to be very clear. This is not church. This is for spiritual leaders. And again, I believe that the church is a major part of the African-American community. But I don't want people to walk away thinking that I'm only saying this to those who are believers. Whatever your conceptualization or whatever your beliefs are, I am saying to you that I believe that we first and foremost have to serve. And if we serve, we're willing to follow, which will make us excellent leaders. Anything resonating or anything said about this, Elliot, this particular slide? Okay.
Well, the pieces so far have been, let's see, that people actually, our participants don't like the statements. That is a sad list that yesterday's man versus today's man define men differently. And it is sad and true and also sounds constraining.
I like that. I like that. And you're absolutely right. But again, we have to think about how men of yesterday and today are being socialized into believing that these statements are actually representative of who we are and what we are. I like that. So let's go deeper into the man box. And we've all heard this term called toxic masculinity. And we talk about it from the point of men are often, I work with a number of male clients, and they often tell me that they feel like when they're with their partner that they're being emasculated. Men are taught that you are never to be a victim. And again, this goes back to that question that you talked about earlier, Elliot, about how do we get in contact and teach men that it's okay to be in contact with your emotions and feelings. I know some of you were probably at the barbershop talk last night where a male last night said, brothers, why is there a struggle for us to say that I love you to each other? When he put that out there, I immediately said to that brother, because I know him and know him well, I love you. He responded by saying, I love you too. And so then we had just the parade of the men on the screen saying how comfortable it is for those men to say to each other, I love you, and to still feel accepted as a part of our tribe. And so we have to define, I love this caption because it says, men are not naturally more violent, but we are often taught to be, because we're often told that this is the right way to act. And that goes into that whole premise of toxic masculinity. We learn to suppress our emotions. We learn that, again, that aggression is the only way that we can get our point across. And so the whole point of me talking about this toolbox is that what we've got to start teaching our young brothers, our young men, and our older men is that not every time something happens or occurs to you that you perceive to be as aggression towards you, do you need to reach into your toolbox and pull out a sledgehammer. A sledgehammer may not always be the right tool to use. So the goal, again, is to give them additional tools that they can have in their toolbox so that they can realize, I can go through my toolbox and I can discern and decide what's the most appropriate tool to use in response to what I'm perceiving to be happening to me.
Dr. Kelly, with that said, I just want to make sure that I get this young woman's question in here, because in regard to your, that man mental toolbox, as she says, what are some ways that female helpers like clinicians, case managers, mentors, those who serve Black men in a way that dignifies and empowers and also tends to their most vulnerable needs? And it sounds like that is something that you are naturally flowing into with this toolbox.
That's exactly right. Again, the thing that I will offer to you, and I'd love to hear from that person if you're here, or if we have any clinicians that are out there, please feel free to come on live and to join in this conversation. The thing about it is that we all have a toolbox. The real issue or challenge is sometimes we don't have all the tools that we need in our toolbox. And that's part of what we're doing as educators, as clinicians. My job as a clinician is to help people to add new tools to their toolbox and to help them to realize that they can decide what tool needs to pull out and when is it appropriate to pull out certain tools. I'm never going to say it's never appropriate to pull out a sledgehammer, but you have to decide when that sledgehammer is more useful versus pulling out a regular hammer. And so for those out there that are listening again, please join in this conversation and help me to assist people in developing new tools that they can add to their toolbox. And I do want to say this, we're taught to train a child in the way that he or she should grow. And the reason why the Bible is saying train a child, because that is the time that we can mold and help them to learn different skills and different tools, give them different tools that they can later use in their adult life. And so the earlier we start that, the better we are as a community, the better we are as a society. I want us to take a look at what Dr. David Satcher, and I think we all know that Dr. Satcher was the former Surgeon General, and this is what he had to say as it relates to mental health. There's no scientific reason to differentiate between mental health and other kinds of health. Mental illnesses are physical illnesses. I want you to think about this for a second, because we know that there is so much stigma around to talk about mental illness or mental health in our communities, but we know that we're suffering from it. My original question to this group, I read you a list of things and I asked you, would you help me? The reality of the situation is that many of us have experienced those things. We've experienced sadness. We've experienced anxiety. We've experienced where we've either lost a job or a partner. We've experienced where someone in our family has been diagnosed with a physical disability of diabetes, cancer, or hypertension. We know people in our community or in our families that are dealing with substance abuse related issues. We know of people that are in abusive relationships. The question is, what can we do to assist those individuals in getting the resources and the services that they may need, because those things should not define one's life. There are things that are happening to us in real time, but they don't define who we are. So let's talk about this for a second. I want to introduce you to this mental health continuum. It's not something I created, but it is something that we all know about. On one end or extreme of the mental health continuum, we have where we're doing well. Life is great. We may experience occasional stress, but the reality of the situation, there's little to no impairments that are inhibiting us from living a very fruitful and authentic life. When you move towards the middle, where most of us live and exist, most of us are comfortable dealing with those mild to moderate issues that come up in our life. The loss of a loved one, the losing of a job, going through a separation, dealing with death, dealing with being stressed out about work. That's falling in the mild to moderate areas of distress. Then when you move to the other extreme or the other end of the continuum, you get to where we hit mental illness, where things become chronic and the distress becomes real. And these are often where we as individuals in a community, whether it's in church, we begin to notice problems. We begin to note that someone is struggling with something. And this is where, if we can intervene when they're in the center and they're talking to us and they're telling us about what's going on, that's where we want to try to intervene. We want to try to prevent things from becoming chronic. Any questions out there, Elliot? I can get on a roll and just talking.
So you know what, this next question ties in directly into this. And what do we do when we shut all the way down, when we get to that level on the continuum of that, what we feel mental illness and just not being able to move, mobilized even?
You know, that's when it is incumbent upon us as family, friends, community, church members, leaders, whatever our roles are, to say something to someone. Even if they don't tell us what's going on, there's an opportunity at every point. Most of us, if not all of us, have some kind of relationship with someone. When we see something, we have to say something, and oftentimes saying something may not be enough. We can do something. And the doing something may be as much as, can I not only call someone with you, can I go with you to get this assistance or help that you need? I will be the first to say that there have been a lot of disparities, not only in the health world, but also the mental health world. For people of color, our experiences, most of us, when we think of our experiences of going to a hospital or seeking help or seeking care, it has not always been positive. But at some point in time, we need to have allies. And we need to not only have allies, but we need to have accomplices. And with an accomplice is someone who is going to get down in the dirt and get dirty with you. And that's going to be the person who's not going to only say, hey, I'm going to stand up and speak for you, but I'm going to walk this walk with you to ensure that you get what you need. We have to convey to each other that we're not alone in this. We have to begin to normalize these behaviors and show each other that there are other people who are struggling, who are experiencing some of these same issues that we are.
Dr. Kelly, in regard to those behaviors, we have a great comment here from Cliff. I think it's important to understand that these behaviors aren't created in a vacuum. They're shaped by culture and other sociological factors. It's hard to tell men to be vulnerable, yet depend and reward them when they exhibit toughness or stoicism. the struggle with this struggle with this is in contradiction, shows up in my clinical work with men, especially Black men, often.
Ah, excellent point. That is such an excellent point. And the reality of the situation is you're absolutely right. You know, here I am saying, you know, and others will say to you, you need to be vulnerable. But we all know how we felt when we saw George Floyd. We all know how we felt when we hear the stories of a Breonna Taylor's. And as the caption goes, and it says hashtag say their names, we all know what it means to be an African American in America. We all realize and recognize when we saw the raid on the Capitol, most of us know how that made us feel, because we resigned ourselves to the fact that had that been majority people of color, the outcome could have looked and would have possibly been very different than what it was. So I hear what you're saying, and I absolutely agree with you. But again, that goes back to our toolbox. We've got to know when it's okay to be vulnerable, when it's okay to let our hair down, if you will, and to be around a group that is supportive of who we are and what we are. And when do we need to be defensive? We can't operate from our old brain. The amygdala and the hypothalamus are part of the old brain region. And that part of the brain wants to do is to keep us in this fight or flight response. So I really employ you to learn some new skills so that you can move out of that fight or flight. Because when you're in that fight or flight response mode or pattern of behavior, that is when we're at our highest level of heightened stress. Great comments, great questions coming in here. What else? Go on, Elliot.
And maybe maybe this is something to hold into, this. Isaac Rowe was asked, any thoughts on why a man is defined by what we do as opposed to who we are?
Elliot, you want to respond to that?
So
Elliot didn't know I was going to put him on the spot. Elliot, you're a great colleague and you're extremely knowledgeable. Read that question one more time. I like that.
Any thoughts on why a man is defined by what we do as opposed to who we are? And I would posit out there that we are just as humans, especially within American society, we can only see and show like what our actions are, right? And then how those actions are interpreted is basically what other people use to kind of define for themselves what we are. So it's about, what I'm feeling is I can do one thing. I can walk, I can wear a certain kind of clothing, I can speak in a certain way, I can code switch different kind of places. And those actions are now having other people within my community and without, they're defining who I am. And it's like, if I'm going to internalize that, am I going to dwell on what I think other people are defining me as? I definitely have. And it's a struggle that I feel like all Black men have gone through, and it's caused us some harm, but it also, in terms of facing it, I feel like it's empowered me personally in making me define who I am.
Yeah. Elliot, what a great response. Thank you for sharing that. I knew I could put you on the spot and you would share that. And Elliot, what you're speaking to is our socialization. The family, the framework of the family, most of what we all have learned came from that primary family. Then it goes into the school. And to Elliot's point, what we decide to place importance on as a family becomes the thing that kids are often looking at to reveal who they are. Before we came on this morning, Elliot, myself, and a couple of other colleagues were talking about a young rapper, Little Uzi, I think his name is, who just put a $24 million diamond, pierced it into his forehead as Elliot scratches his forehead there. What was that about? What does that signify? What does that say, not only about Little Uzi, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, what does that say about him? And how is he using that $24 million diamond to define himself? I believe as African-American men, we feel, and I don't want to speak for all Black men, I can speak for the ones that I know and that I work with. We've been socialized to believe that our value is based on what we have and not based on who we are. I want to say that one more time. The men that I work with and the men, some of the men that I know, not all, again, and I don't want to be the spokesperson for all Black men, but sometimes our value comes from what we have and not what we have to offer. And so we have to be careful about how we begin to internalize these messages that we receive from certain family members, from the school system, from the media, because that's all a part of that socialization process. I saw that there was a Janet Moore, I think it was, that had a question or raised her hand.
Let's see. So while I am having a difficulty, oh, here we go. Yes, Janet.
Welcome, Ms. Moore. Talk to us.
Well, Janet, please feel free to interrupt me. I just want to make sure that I share also this question while we, wait for all the technical things to fall into place. Okay. And that this is in regard or as in response to the little Uzi reference. So that goes back to vulnerability and not having the spaces to express freely who men are, to not have the conversations about the inner world versus the external world of doing or actions.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. Ms. Moore, are you able to speak to us? Okay. As Ms. Moore, and as Elliot said, Ms. Moore, as we work through some of the technical challenges, once you're able to speak to us, just jump in and interrupt, and we're just going to acknowledge you as soon as we can get you on. Let's develop some common language around mental health and mental illness, because I think we have a lot of misperception and misconceptions about the language, and language is very important. So I just want to introduce us to some basic concepts. So what is mental health? It involves being able to function in a daily and resulting in function daily and productive activities. And those activities can be with work, school, caregiving, wherever you are. If you're able to have effective, and that word is so important, effective functioning, having a fulfilling relationship, and the ability to adapt to change and cope with adversity. My mother used to sing this song, Lord, don't move my mountain, but give me the strength to climb. And Lord, don't take away my stumbling blocks, but lead me all around. That was a song about adversity. Understanding that change and adversity is going to be an integral part of all of our lives. And that when it comes, that you have the ability to pivot and to move on a dime. We're all going to face adversity at some point in time over the course of our lives. The question is not whether or not it's going to come. When it comes, do you have the skill set? Do you have the things necessary in your toolbox to pivot and to move around and to navigate that adversity? What is some common language around mental illness? What exactly is it? Mental illness refers to a collective, diagnosable mental health disorders. And here's what it impacts. It impacts our change in thinking, emotions, and our behaviors. It creates distress or problems in functioning at school, work, all of those things that we listed that are healthy. Mental illness begins to impact those things negatively. Let's take a look at the magnitude of the problem, because sometimes I don't think we really understand how normal mental illness is in our community. Worldwide, as many as 450 million people suffer from a mental or behavioral disorder yearly. Nearly 1 million people commit suicide every year. And this one I really want you to pay attention to. 4 of the 6 leading causes of years lived with disability, I really want you to see this, are neuropsychiatric disorders, depression, alcohol use, schizophrenia, or bipolar. Now, we're talking about the years of living with cancer, hypertension, diabetes, strokes. 4 of the 6 leading causes. 4 of the 6 are related to these issues here. 1 in 4 families, or at least one, have at least one member with a mental disorder. And family members are often the caregivers of people with those mental disorders. And of course, here's why we don't want to talk about it. This is why we don't want to acknowledge it, because they are often victims of stigma, discrimination, both inside and outside of psychiatric institutions, both inside and outside of their home, both inside and outside of their church, both inside and outside of their communities. And so therefore, people don't want to come forward and say, I'm struggling.
And Dr. Kelly, I definitely want to follow up that statement with just having a similar feeling, similar knowledge, and to reaffirm that statement, because as a Black man with dual diagnosis, bipolar disorder 2 and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, I was so scared to share that. And the few times I did, especially with family, I'll never forget the responses, not necessarily to the moment of me sharing, but to the moments afterward that made me regret sharing. If I ever felt sad, it's just his bipolar. Yeah. If I ever talked back, if I ever gave a differing opinion, if I ever had any reaction under an emotional lens that a member of my family did not agree with, or in really many ways saw as a threat, instant insult. And I feel like I am very fortunate to have had quality counseling and therapy throughout my life. But if it wasn't for that, and for individuals like yourself and the other Black men that I have seen openly speak about their mental health, I can't imagine. Actually, you know what? I can imagine where I would be right now, and it would not be in front of this camera.
Right. Thank you, Elliot. Well said. Ms. Moore, were we able to get you where we can hear you? Is she able to unmute her? You're muted. Go ahead, Elliot. What were you saying?
Let's see. So, Janet, I'm just going to make sure I ask you to unmute. I just put that option into the Zoom chat. So you can just hit yes. And while we wait, I want to make sure that we also get other female perspectives in this, so you can, give your responses, Dr. Kelly. Felicia William Dennis has said that the nature of men is to be competitive, and as a result, they see others, including their female counterparts, as a threat.
Well said. I mean, that is just well said. And again, I can't overestimate or underestimate when I say that socialization is such a major part of this. In communities of color, kids are raised, boys are raised to believe that if you don't play a sport of some kind, because that's where we put our emphasis on, if you're not a rapper, if you're not somehow, it's incredulous to hear young boys say that they got to be hard because they believe that if they're soft in any way, somehow they will become a victim. Somehow someone will take advantage of that. The value or the misvalue that is not being placed on education in our society is just astounding. When we know that these are the best and brightest minds that are out there. So I agree with that point, that we are raising a generation, even to this day, of where you've got to be hard. I remember listening to a debate amongst rappers that if you were a rapper and you could somehow sing or say something that was soft, you were then not considered hardcore or not considered a good rapper. And so in industries, it happens everywhere. And so we've got to think about, as parents, as members of church, as members in communities, when we see a young male trying to express their emotions, what is your response to that situation? Do you go to that person, whether they're your child, whether they're someone else's, they're in your family or not? Do you say to them, stop crying? Boys don't cry, men don't cry. Or do you say to them, it's okay to feel what you're feeling? It's okay. The manner in which you're expressing yourself is acceptable. So great question, and thank you, or great comment. Thank you for that. So let's look at some common mental illnesses. And most of us have heard of them, but I'm not going to read this to you. This is a lot of text. I'm going to leave it up there for a while. I am just going to just highlight some parts of it, but it's a lot of text, and I acknowledge that. Anxiety disorders. Nearly 30% of the people will experience an anxiety disorder at some point in time over the course of their lives. I want you to take this into about a third of us. Depression. This one always creates some controversy, especially that number 70%. And the reason why it's 70% because of the stress, the amount of stress that Black men experience, the amount of racism that not only Black men, but Black women and Black people as a whole experience. Being denied, being told you're not good enough, being made to feel you're not good enough or you're not worthy. Imposter syndrome, being in a situation where you feel like, well, you have the credentials, but something inside of you just creates this sense of doubt about whether or not you really and truly belong at the table. Bipolar. Schizophrenia.
Dr. Kelly, in regard to definitions, we have Noah Diggs, who's made the comment, preconceived definitions are set experientially by design or by accident. It's totally up to the individual to defy the preconceptions by reshaping the narrative by our byproduct of our actions. In other words, we shape the narrative, not the narrative shapes us.
I love that. I love that. I love hearing you say that, because we do control our narrative. And later on in this presentation, and we're going to get there quickly because I think we have about 30 minutes left. We're going to get there because one of the things that I teach a lot of my clients is how to rewrite your life script. That you don't have to continue to act out and play in the role that you have now assumed because someone has given it to you and you believe that it is the only script and role that you have. So I love what you just said about rewriting or not accepting someone else's narrative or definition of who or what you are. Well said. Post-traumatic stress disorder. I do a lot of work around trauma, and I know that a lot of us have experienced some form or some level of trauma. And we carry it around like it's the albatross around our necks, and it's this weight that we just refuse to let go. You can let it go. You can talk through it. You can work through it, and you can open that door and you can close that door, never to go back through it again. Many of us want to be authentic. We want to be authentic in the way that we live. We want to live authentic lives. We want to live lives that are full and bountiful. But many of us struggle with how to get there. Addressing your trauma will help you to begin the process of closing and locking those doors forever. Addiction and substance abuse. How many of us, because of those other common mental illnesses, have turned to substance use and abuse to self-medicate what it is that we're feeling and experiencing? We've all heard the term functional alcoholic. That someone who is trying to self-medicate is still able to go to work, still able to hold a steady job, still able to have a semblance of a meaningful relationship. But again, I don't want us just to be bystanders, but being a bystander is a good part, because a good bystander sees something, says something, and when they can, they do something. So if you know a friend, a family member, a church member, a coworker, someone you love, you care about, and you know they're in anguish, they're in pain, they're hurting, you can do something.
And Dr. Kelly, that ties directly into, and I want to make sure to address this person's question. So how do you get the man to become aware and acknowledge and have acknowledgement of mental health? And how do you get him to explore that?
You know, one of the things that you have to do with men is that you have to show them that you're in their corner. And I want us to begin to abandon, you know, I've heard for years, and I too was caught up in this movement and moment, if you will, of creating a safe space. I'm a firm believer in safe spaces. But I think at some point in time, we have to abandon those safe spaces and create brave spaces. And it's in those brave spaces that we find our voice, and we can help others to find their voice. It's within those brave spaces that we can start talking about things that are impacting our community. And for a man, you've got to create that safe space first and foremost. But then at some point in time, you've got to gradually move them into a brave space. And you've got to be able to enter and engage them in that dialogue of talking about the real problem, the real issue. And you've got to show them that you are a person who is willing to support them through this. Most times what I hear from men, Black men in particular, is that their female counterpart, the woman in their life, or the man in their life, comes at them in a very confrontational way. You have a problem. We've got to change that narrative, and we've got to start asking the question, what happened to you? That's a trauma-informed way of addressing issues for anyone. We've got to stop saying you have the problem, or you have a problem, or you're the problem. And we've got to start seeking to understand that individual. African-American men and mental health, here's a snapshot. 1 in 5 Americans struggle with mental illnesses every year. Now, if we know that to be true of 1 in 5 Americans, you know, I think it was Malcolm X that said, when America has a cold, the Black community has the flu. Because we know that if 1 in 5 Americans are struggling with this issue is often left undiagnosed, unaddressed in our communities. We're not talking about it. But here are the things that are happening in our communities. We're 20% more likely to have a serious psychological distress, to experience psychological distress than our white counterparts. Suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death among African Americans between the ages of 15 to 24. That 15 to 24 period is such an important period. It's on the verge, it's adolescence moving into young adulthood. And many of us want to think and want to believe that that age group should be living their best life. And we live in an age where there's Facebook, there's Instagram, there's Twitter, and there are all of these social platforms. And all of these social platforms have where people can say they like something. They can click a button and say like. And we saw an exponential number of suicides when those like buttons were being used, because when people say they didn't like something, there was a problem. I see that we have two participants with their hands raised.
Yes, we have. Here you go. So let's invite Anthony Miller and Sonia Hosey.
Okay, can I be heard?
Yes, Mr.
Great,
Miller,
yes.
how are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Thank you for coming in.
No, thank you for all that you're presenting. I wanted to circle back to the awareness, getting Black men to be aware of mental health and the mental health in their lives. So I do a lot of research, and you know, back in history, when I think about history, when we were slaves, and we expressed that we had some form of depression, they kind of beat us and abused us and treated us extremely bad. And I feel like, in a sense, well, the history says that we began to retract and never express that we, you know, had any kind of depressive symptoms, or mental health symptoms, due to the fear of, you know, being abused and beat and hurt. And do you feel like, because of that, back in the day, it still kind of runs in our veins? It kind of got embedded in our DNA, and maybe being exposed and educated on the history of what, you know, mental health was like in those days could be beneficial in bringing about, I guess, receptiveness in the Black community.
Wow, what a powerful question, Mr. Miller. You just touched upon many great points. I'm going to answer your question in reverse, if I may. I want people to go, if you're interested, take a moment and go and look at the apology that was released by the American Psychiatric Society, the APA Association, the American Psychiatric Association, on January 18th. The shot, January 18, 2021, just released an apology. It was an apology that their foundation just released, saying, we apologize to African American community, to indigenous community, to communities of color for what we reported or perpetrated upon those communities during the 1800s. When in 1843, if you were a slave, you were diagnosed with drapetomania if you tried to escape. Basically, what they said was, in 1843, the American Psychiatric Association said that drapetomania, that if you were a slave trying to escape, you were trying to escape because you had a mental illness or mental defect, that you should have loved being enslaved and being held as a slave. That was the American Psychiatric Association. They also apologized for the number of experiments that they engaged in that were unethical and illegal in the African American communities and communities of color. So you're spot on. That, again, is why there is such huge distrust in mental health and healthcare. We all remember the Tuskegee syphilis study. We all, and the list goes on and on. And so, you know, whether or not it's in our DNA, there are a lot of my colleagues, there are a lot of you that probably would argue yes. Joy DeGruy did a wonderful book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, where she argues your point, that part of what has now become a part of our DNA, that has become inscripted, embedded in our DNA, is a lot of that slave mentality. Because we remember our fathers, our grandfathers, bringing a lot of that energy, a lot of those things that they had learned into where we are now. And so we're still practicing some of those behaviors that are not useful or good in our community. So whether or not it's a part of our DNA or whether or not it's a learned behavior, it is not good in our community. It is enabling us, it is hurting us, and it is not helping us to function well at all. Mr. Miller, what a great question. Thank you for that. And Elliot, you said there was someone else. I hope that helped, Mr. Miller.
Oh yeah, no, it was great. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, sir.
Yes, and Ms. Hosey, please.
Can you unmute me?
You're unmuted. We can hear you.
Oh, okay. I'm in my room. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm glad that that there's this discussion. On yesterday, I had wanted to make a comment on yesterday. Um, I'm not sure if you all know that I am a clergy. I've been a clergy for a while. I am knowledgeable about mental health, first aid, and we connect with resources and all of that. Um, I I was faced with a situation where a male counterpart came to me discussing some of the issues that he was having. The part that I became very uncomfortable with is that he stated that he wanted to commit suicide. Okay, a female clergy trying to address an issue with a male, it became very uncomfortable. And the question was asked to me, well, why did he come to you? My answer was, I don't know why he came to me. I tried and attempted to provide him with resources and informed him this is what he could do and all of that. But as a woman clergy, it has been very hard to help male counterparts to seek out the resources that they may need. And this specific situation, I was placed in a very uncomfortable. It was very uncomfortable because I didn't know why he came to me.
Mm.
So I'm just making that comment because again, I just didn't know what to do. Even though I had all the training, I had all of the information, he was comfortable in coming to me, which I valued, but I was in a very uncomfortable situation, and nor did he want to reach out to anyone else. And so that's just a comment, especially when you're a female clergy, it's very difficult to work with your male counterparts, even when they trust you.
Right, right. And I think that last part that you just stated there was something about you that he trusted. There was something I believe about you that he felt very comfortable in going to and sharing and saying to you. So, you know, we don't always have to be in people's presence and be able to speak. Sometimes vicariously, people can feel our energy. And so something about you, but I don't want you to think that it's just uncomfortable for you. Talking about an issue of suicide, that can make anyone uncomfortable. And it could be uncomfortable whether it's male on male, female on female. It is a very uncomfortable thing. You gave that person resources, which was amazing. And I think, you know, depending on whatever your discernment, and I heard you say, and the thing that I took away from this is, I heard you say that you've been introduced to mental health first aid, which is important for our clergy to understand. And I love our clergy are starting to realize where they start and where they end, because the clergy in Austin and communities around the country are starting to do an amazing job and getting people referred to the necessary resources that can really help them. And sometimes we have to take that extra step and say, I hear you. I don't feel comfortable leaving you just with this information. Can I go and make a call for you, with you, for someone that I know you can reach out to and they can help? Can I work with you right here in this space? Because you came to me, let's work together to getting you connected right now. Because I don't want to walk away and you feel abandoned or left in a situation that you can't handle. So that's part of why, that's not part, it's a major reason why I love this conference. Because not only are you introduced to people with lived experiences, but this conference does a wonderful job of also introducing you to resources. And these are resources that you can get connected with. These are people that you can have in your back pocket and you can pick up the phone and you can call. You and I are going to connect as a result of this conference, and we're going to become friends. And this is for anyone, because I want to be connected to you so that if you ever find yourself in that situation again, you have someone personally that you can reach out to and connect with. So thank you for that. And obviously what you did worked, and whatever you're doing is working, because again, this person felt something, sensed something about who you were and who you are that made them comfortable. They didn't hold it to themselves. They brought it out and brought it to you. So thank you for being available to them.
Can I make one more comment?
Yes, ma'am, please.
My male counterparts did not appreciate that. My male counterparts did not appreciate him coming to me because they believed that that was their role and not mine.
You know what? This is no disregard or disrespect to your male counterparts. If he wanted to go to them, he would have. He went to you. And that's my statement on that. So again, thank you for being available to him. Awesome job. What great comments by our last question and Mr. Miller. This is what this is about. This is the kind of dialogue and back and forth that I want us to have. This is awesome. Great comments. We have anything else, Elliot? I want you to take a look at this snapshot. Elliot, go ahead.
Yes, definitely. So I feel like there are two pieces that tie into this snapshot. The first with those three bubbles on a personal level, especially with the suicide. I am very fortunate to have been successful at surviving those. And those were at the age of, I believe, 22 and 24, right at that cusp, just to speak more to just the validity of this data. And then same with the again, successful in surviving, right? But then this comment or this question that I'm going to introduce now, I think ties directly into the proportion of African Americans who need mental health treatment and get it less than half of whites. And that question is, as a Black woman with a father who has several diagnoses, with the major one being schizophrenia, and a daughter with bipolar disorder, I believe that we do not know what we do not know. Educating our community as a whole is the key. And what are your thoughts on our jails and prisons being our largest mental health institutions?
You're spot on. The data speaks for itself. That I don't want to misquote the data, but there is a lot of data that says at a minimum, more than half of those individuals who are incarcerated have a mental health issue of some kind. We see it in our school system. Our kids being misdiagnosed or going undiagnosed. And so it starts there. We know what's happening in our homes. And what I'm saying to our communities of color, and specifically to our Black families, we have got to stop. We have got to stop ignoring what we see. If you don't know, you got to find someone that you can ask. But we've got to start these conversations about what's going on in our communities, in our households. And for you to be in that situation, there are resources that are available to you in this community. There are culturally competent resources, and I want to say that, and I want to say that loudly and clearly, that don't just reach out to a resource. Make sure that you find a culturally competent resource. Interview us as you would any other doctor, physician, healthcare worker, mental health worker. Use that first session as an opportunity to figure out whether or not it's a good fit, whether or not this person has the cultural competency, has the skill set to address and meet the needs of what it is. Because I'm gonna tell you, and I will be the first to say this, not all therapists are created equally. And that holds true for any profession. So my thing is, thank you for raising this issue. You're spot on, that there are so many things that we've got to talk about and address in our communities. So why are we afraid to talk about mental health in our community? We're afraid of being labeled as one of these. None of us we don't talk about it because we're afraid of being labeled as psycho, weirdo, crazy, schizo, basket case, wacko, and there are other terms that I'm sure people in our community have heard. Stigma. continues to be a major issue. Our kids are struggling. We are struggling with our new reality as COVID has presented it to us. We haven't had contact with family, friends, loved ones in almost a year. That disconnect has impacted all of us. And we've got to think about not only how it's impacting us as adults, how and what kind of impact is this having on our children who are being dislocated from their schools, who are having to learn, as we all are, to use social platforms, whether it's GoToMeeting, Zoom, or whatever platform you're using, as our new way of interacting with each other. As a man thinking in his heart, so is he. So why are men of faith struggling? A lot of it has to do with society. A lot of it has to do with family dynamics. And oh yes, believe it or not, a lot of it has to do with dad. We have got to stop saying women have daddy issues. Men also have daddy issues. Whether dad was there, not there, what dad said to us when he was there, why isn't dad here? Why don't I have the same last name as my dad? We struggle with those same issues. And so we've got to get out of this state of being where women are the only ones with daddy issues, because that's not the truth. I'm just going to put this up here. And
so Dr. Kelly,
yes, sir.
I feel like this slide especially ties into Craig Moore's question and comment. That is, as a young man that grew up attending church all the time, I have often heard church leaders recite Ephesians 6:12, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, and other Bible verses to advocate for prayer and faithfulness as the answer to any mental health issue. The lack of biblical references for treatment and counseling to deal with mental health issues reflect the cultural norms that existed when the Bible was written. Some still believe that a person struggling with a mental illness has been affected by sin or the devil. Consider the story of Job, for example. How do we convince church leaders to advocate for treatment and counseling when there is no or little biblical support for treatment and counseling?
Wow. I can't help but to be who I am. And I said at the outset of this, I am a PK. And so I respect where my clients are. And my goal is not to employ my values upon them, but I do meet my clients where they are. And there are some of my clients that come into this with a very spiritual lens. I know that I know where my help comes from. And I believe sincerely that we are at war. And I do believe that that war is with these principalities and not with each other. That's that flesh and blood. I don't think it's with each other. But you got to understand that anger becomes a spirit. Sadness becomes a spirit in our lives. Anxiety. All of those things, if we allow them, we create a narrative around them, and they becomes these spirits that begin to impact us, and we begin to believe that we are powerless against them. And the Bible tells us that we are more than conquerors, and we've just got to have that faith and that belief. I'm going to skip through this one. So, as we come to a close, and I think we have about 5 minutes here, and this has been great. I missed that live interaction. I just got to say that, Elliot. But you've been great at helping me and helping us to get those questions out there. But again, I said this, and I love the question or the person who raised the issue about narratives, because I think each and every one of us needs to look at the script of which we are operating and which we are operating from. Your script is in your power. You have the ability to rewrite that script any way that you want to. You no longer have to continue the narrative of what you were told when you were younger, what you were told when you were in middle school, high school, as a young adult, and now at this point in your life. Whatever script you want to write for your life, you are not only the leading actor, You are the director and executive producer of your own story. And you've just got to reach back and take that power. This is your life. You can live the best life that you want. Here's why mental health matters. Without it, happiness declines, relationships suffer, productivity slips, and personal and organizational resiliency declines. You have got to know and say to yourself, you matter. You've also got to recognize that in every situation and scenario that you can come up with in your life, if you just speak it, if you just say it, you will discover that you are not alone. So for our brothers that are out there, well, before I get to that, here's what the church can do. Create a more welcoming and inclusive congregation. Know mental health professionals in your community. You just heard a clergy person talk about, and know when to make a referral. Distinguish between religious or spiritual problems from mental illness. We've got to be able to identify them, and we've got to be able to identify the resources that can help us get the help and get the connectivity that we want and so desperately need in our community. And approach individuals that have an urgent mental health concern. Approach them, go to them, let them know what you're noticing. Don't ignore the problems that are right there staring you in the face. Let everyone know that they're not alone in addressing these. And for men, I am begging you, when it comes to your health, man up.
Dr. Kelly, thank you for not just this presentation, but for being the person that you are. It means a lot to me personally, and I know to our community at large. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and insight. And audience, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, please just take a few minutes to complete our workshop survey. That'll help us know how we are doing and how we can best serve you. And if you're seeking those CEUs, remember that your forms and the links will be in the survey. Those links are also in our chat. Thank you, take care, and be well.
Be well. Thank you, Elliot. Thank you all for wonderful comments and thoughts. Elliot, I think we have 1 minute left. Is there any conclusion
There we go.
that anyone may have?
Nice. Let's see. Here is one question I think would be great to end with. Can depression occur every year based on a time, an incident, or that had occurred?
And the answer to that is yes. First and foremost, there's something called seasonal affective disorder, also known as SAD. And SAD generally happens when we're not getting as much vitamin D or sunlight on our faces. And generally, it is also concurrent with the holiday period. And so the holiday is often a time that reminds us of those loved ones who are no longer sitting around the table, those loved ones who were here a year ago, and we no longer have the opportunity to interact with them. So absolutely, you know, the thing that we want to be concerned about is complicated grief. We all grieve. Grief is a normal part of our lives. And grief is something that is a process. So don't ever say to anyone, get over your grief, or you should be over that by now. We all grieve differently, and grief has stages, and the stages are not concurrent. They can happen for different people in different angles in different ways. But the thing about it is being able to recognize when someone is grieving, and again, getting them connected to the services and the resources that will be a benefit to them. Again, thank you all. This has been a wonderful session. My information is here. It's on the website, so please look me up if I could ever be of service. And again, to the Central Texas African American Family Support Conference Committee, Elliot, Justin, Vicki, thank you all for the amazing work that you're all are doing. Have a great rest of the day.